There's a famous story about a couple who would come to the Baal Shem Tov once a year from a long distance, and they would beg him to give them a blessing for children because they had none. And every year, the Baal Shem Tov changed the subject, gave them blessings for other things, but he wouldn't give them a blessing for children, which was unusual. Every year they came, and every year the Baal Shem Tov changed the subject.
Yeah.
Finally, one year when they were really, really desperate, the Baal Shem Tov gave them a bracha. And they had a child. To make a long story short, the child lived to be 2 or 3 years old and passed away. The parents came to the Baal Shem Tov, and they had a very painful, serious question. What did we do wrong? The Baal Shem Tov told them the history of the neshama of their child. And the story was that that child had had a very good life, had been a very good person in their previous life, but the first 2 or 3 years of their life, of the child's life, was not holy, was in an unholy environment. So the heavenly courts decided that he should relive those first 3 years of life in a holy environment. And that's what happened to their child. So the Baal Shem Tov was saying, you didn't do anything wrong, and neither did your child. The child came for 3 years or 2 years, I remember the exact detail, and got exactly what it needed. And you were chosen because you gave that child a holy environment for the first 3 years of its life. Now, the tzaddikim who know these things are not supposed to reveal them. But the compassion that the Baal Shem Tov had for this couple, he took the consequences, whatever they are, and revealed the secrets that he wasn't supposed to reveal. What we learn from the story is 2 things. First of all, the Baal Shem Tov did not explain why the child died. What he did explain is that the child's death was not due to some mistake or some sin or some failing on the part of the parents. That was made very clear. The question of why a child dies, we still don't know. So the first thing that we need to get clear in our minds is that we don't approve of death. We were told to choose life, and we do. We do not approve of death, ever. So when we ask why a person dies, particularly why a child would die, we're not interested in an answer. Because what kind of answer would make you feel better? What kind of answer should make you feel better? In other words, what justification would make you accept death? There shouldn't be. No answer. So when we ask why, we don't want an answer. We're registering a complaint. It's a beautiful story. Maybe you've heard it. Elie Wiesel, who wrote all the books on the Holocaust and survived the Holocaust, everybody would ask him, why? Why did it happen? And of course, he didn't have any better explanation than anybody else. But one time, he did this really beautiful thing. Somebody said to him, tell me why. Why did such a thing happen? And Wiesel took an interesting tack. He said, "I'm sorry, but I'm not at liberty to tell you." So the man said, "You know, and you won't tell me?" He said, "That's right." He said, "Why won't you tell me?" He says, "Because if I tell you, you'll become a Nazi." The man said, "What are you talking about? I'm a Jew. How would I become a Nazi?" This is really brilliant. Wiesel said to him, "You're asking me why 6 million innocent people would be put to death in such a cruel manner. It doesn't let you rest. It doesn't let you sleep. You can't live with it. It horrifies you. Maybe you have nightmares. I don't know. But you're asking me a painful question. Now, I know the answer, and it's a good answer, a convincing answer. And I will give you the answer, and you will walk away feeling better. You will say, oh, so that's why. Okay. See, you've become a Nazi." In other words, who would have the chutzpah to try to make the death any less painful? Do we want that? Would that make us better people? No, it would make us Nazis. So people always say, "I've been asking this question of everybody and no one can give me an answer." Hopefully no one can give you an answer. Because what answer would you accept? Sometimes a question begs for an answer. Sometimes the question should never be answered. The only good answer is bring them back to life. That's an answer. An explanation? Don't explain death to me. Sorry. We don't make peace with death. Never, never, never. I have an interesting medrash. When the Egyptians were drowning in the Red Sea, punished for their horrible treatment of Jews for 210 years, the angels, this was early morning, the angels came to sing their daily songs, and God was upset. How can you sing? My creations are drowning. Now, wait a minute. You're drowning them. And you're drowning them because they deserve to die. They were wicked, evil people. All true. But how can you sing? People are drowning. So no, we don't make peace. We're not supposed to. It's very un-Jewish to make peace with tragedy. The question is, what does the tragedy do to us? If we're choosing life and therefore will not accept any explanation for death, so what is my life? The person who quits living because of a death is not being consistent. You're upset with death because life is so precious. Where do I see how life is precious? In the way you're living. So our reaction to death is more life. More life. To the degree that I love life, to that degree I hate death. Two sides of the same coin. If I don't enjoy life, then why am I complaining about death? If I don't think life is wonderful, then what's so terrible about losing life? So that's just a general attitude towards death. Even if we're not related, even if we're not close, Well, let me share a story with you. I was invited years ago to speak in Argentina. It was a long flight. I live in Minnesota. From Minnesota to New York, change planes. From New York to Miami, change planes. From Miami to, I think it was Santiago, Chile, and then from Chile to Buenos Aires. It was a long, miserable flight. By the time I got there, I was wretched. And what happens, the rabbi there picks me up, takes me to a hotel room, and I recover overnight, and then I'm there for a week to give talks. The rabbi picks me up, and we're going to the hotel. Suddenly, the rabbi says to me, there's a woman who had a terrible tragedy, and she is severely depressed. She refused to come out of her apartment in over 6 months. Doesn't want to talk to anybody. But she finally agreed to speak to you. So we'll stop on the way to the hotel and you'll talk to her. I was not happy. It couldn't wait another day. Straight from the airport. And why didn't you ask me? You went ahead and you made an appointment. You didn't ask me, you didn't warn me, you didn't tell me. But she's expecting us. So what choice do I have? So we went. We came to this apartment. We came in, the woman there was, for all practical purposes, not among the living. She hadn't left the apartment in 6 months, hadn't spoken to anyone. There was no color in her skin. There was no life in her voice. She was scary. And she tells me what happened. 19-year-old son was driving back from their summer home, got into a car accident and didn't survive. And then she tells me what an incredible, good child this boy was. Mature beyond his years, considerate, respectful, beautiful, beautiful character. She finishes, what could I say? So I said, he sounds like an incredible young man. And you had him for 19 years. She was not at all impressed. So I said, you know, the shock is terrible. Came out of nowhere, healthy boy, all of a sudden he's gone. But imagine there was no shock. Imagine God came to you and said, there's this very special soul who needs to be born for 19 years. And I'm looking for someone to be his mother. And God would ask you, no surprises, it's only for 19 years, but would you be his mother? I said, what would you have said if God had asked you? And I was sure she would say yes. She said, absolutely not. Which took me by surprise. So I said, well, then it's a good thing he didn't ask you. A flood of tears opened up. She sobbed her heart out for about 20 minutes. And in front of my eyes, she came back to life. It was the most amazing, the most emotional, the most meaningful exchange I've ever had. She came back to life in front of my eyes. Now we're in the car going to the hotel room. And I remember how upset I was that they didn't ask me. And I realized if they had asked me, what would I have said? I would have said, absolutely not. I want to go to the hotel room. And that would have been the wrong answer. That was an experience I would not give up for any money, for any hotel room. So it's a good thing they didn't ask. And sometimes it's a good thing that God doesn't ask, because we would embarrass ourselves with the wrong answer. But I wondered, what is it that I said that did this? I said, it's a good thing God didn't ask you. So why did she have that reaction? Well, about 15 years later, I was invited to speak in Mexico. I arrive in Mexico, and I am looking forward to a hotel room. And the driver came to pick me up. He says, you know, we're not like the people in Argentina. I'm taking you straight to the hotel. I said, thank you. That's very thoughtful of you. And then he says, at the hotel, there's a couple waiting for you. They've had a terrible tragedy, and they need to talk to you. I said, can we do it in an hour? He said, no, they're leaving for Israel. They need to talk to you now. I was, again, not very happy. I met this couple, the most delightful people you can imagine. And they had a tragedy. A 6-year-old little girl suffered an aneurysm, just so rare. In 10 minutes, she was gone. And they weren't home at the time. They were devastated, to put it mildly, but they were so angry. They were so angry at God. He used to put on tefillin. He stopped. They used to keep Shabbos. They stopped. He used to go to the shul. He was a very active member of the, he stopped. He didn't want to hear from a rabbi. He didn't want to hear from anybody. He was angry. It's interesting what he said. He said, I'm very angry at God. You know why? Because I love him. And he did this to me. So I'm thinking, what can I possibly say? So obviously I had to take a completely different approach than what you expect from a rabbi. So I said to the father, has your daughter visited you yet? He was a little surprised by that. He says, yes, twice. I said, what did she tell you? He said, she didn't say anything. She was just smiling, letting me know that she's happy. I said, why did she come twice? Not just to let you know that she's happy. She's trying to tell you that you're not letting her be happy. She wants you to be happy. The thought that she is causing you to not keep Shabbos and not put on tefillin, that bothers her. So, being her father, why would you do that to her? She came to visit you because she needs something from you. She came to you as your daughter because you are her father, and she can't stand the thought that she is making you miserable. So when did you stop being her father? You became a professional mourner, and you forgot to be a father. And again, the most amazing thing happened. He stands up and he says, should we put on the tefillin now, or should I wait till I get home? Now I understood. The reason that woman in Argentina had that reaction, because I asked her, if God would tell you that you would have your son for 19 years, you would say no? Do you hear what you're saying? You would say no to your child? The mother in her came back, and she came back to life. So what happened with this woman, and the reason she was so depressed, is because she stopped being a mother to her son. The relationships that a person has in this world do not end with death. They never end. So just very briefly, let's take a look at what death really is. What is it? A human being is made up of body and soul. I think we spoke about this before. The body is made of earth and eventually goes back to the earth. From dust you are, and to dust you return. The soul is a living entity, a dynamic being that is fully alive. And it doesn't live off batteries. And it doesn't need to be plugged in. And it doesn't need to be fed. It's alive by itself, of itself. It is a living thing. A living thing cannot die. Life can't die. It's like water that is not wet, or fire that is not hot. There's no such thing as a dead life. It's an oxymoron. So the soul is really alive. It can't die. The body was never alive. So what do you mean it died? It was never alive. Yeah, it got life from the soul when the soul was in the body. But it was not the body's life. So really, where and when does a living thing stop living? Never. It can't. Just like we think death can't come alive, then life can't die. So what stays alive? What do we mean when we say the soul? When the soul is in the body, the person hears and sees and thinks and feels and has relationships, makes attachments, has loves, has hates. All of that is the soul. The body doesn't see, the body doesn't hear. So when the body and the soul separate, the soul remains unchanged. All of its memories, all of its experiences, its attachments, the things it loves, the things it hates, it all remains the same. Like in that very popular song, David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. David, the king of Israel, is alive and still exists. what is special about that is not that David is still alive. Every person who ever lived is still alive, because life can't die. What that song is telling us, what that verse is telling us is, he's not just alive, he is still the king. He hasn't changed. I mean, some people believe that when a person dies, he goes to heaven and becomes an angel. And all angels are alike. In other words, the life goes on, but not the personality. He's not the same person anymore. See, that's not correct. The same person, same character, the same strengths and the same weaknesses. The person remains intact because the person is the soul, and that does not die. So your father can be your father even if he's overseas. Your mother can be your mother even if she's very, very far away. So what happens when a person passes away, they become distant, not dead. So now, instead of having your mother living right next to you, your mother is living far away. You had your child living in your house, now the child moved to another house. But the child is not gone, the child has not changed. It's just as much your child and you're just as much the parent as before. Only now you have to do it from a distance. In fact, when the soul leaves the body, it sees you, it hears you, it feels for you more than it did when it was in the body, because the body puts a damper on everything. How well can a soul see if it has to look through the eyes? The eyes limit the vision of the soul. How well can a soul hear if it has to be through the ears? How much emotion can a person tolerate if it's in a body? So it has to soften the excitement. The body shouldn't be overwhelmed by it. But a soul can have far more emotion, can feel more, know more, care more. That's why we're very careful what we say about a soul. We're very careful what we write on the tombstone. It shouldn't be exaggeration. It shouldn't be false. It shouldn't be disingenuous, because the soul is very sensitive. And that's why if the relationships that the soul had continue to suffer past a year, it makes the soul very unhappy, because it hates being the cause of pain to anyone, certainly to his own parents. So really, what is death? If the soul can't die, it can't. And if the body was never really alive, it's made out of earth, so it can't die because it was never alive. So what ended? What ended was the partnership. What we call life on earth is a partnership between a soul and a body. That partnership, that combination, ends at the end of the time allotted. Every person is given a certain amount of time. Time for the soul to be in the body. When that time is up, they separate. The soul goes back to where it came from, and the body goes back to where it came from. So what ended? the number of days, but the person does not change at all. The person is very much alive. One final thought. Death cannot be permanent. We have this terrible, terrible mistaken notion that life is temporary and death is permanent. That cannot be. That is so depressing. It's so morbid. Life with all of its richness is temporary, and death, which is cold and dark and nothing, that's forever. That is not a good attitude. It can't be true. The opposite. Life is forever. Death is temporary. Death is temporary for two reasons. First of all, there will come a day when people will stop dying. There will be no more dying because it served its purpose, whatever that is, and that's it. We don't need it anymore. Life will be forever. Secondly, even those who have already died are not going to remain that way forever. They're going to come back. The soul never really gives up on its body, and it looks forward to coming back into its body. The body will be put back together because, like a puzzle, you can take the pieces apart, then you can put them back together again. And the reason that that must happen is because the soul in heaven supposedly gets its reward. When does the body get a reward? And every mitzvah you do is 80 or 90% body. You eat a piece of matzah on Pesach. Who's doing the mitzvah, the body or the soul? Of course, the soul enables the body, but a soul doesn't eat matzah. The body eats the matzah. Giving tzedakah without a physical hand and without physical money and without a hungry person, physically hungry, you can't give tzedakah. So how is it right? How is it acceptable that the soul will go to heaven and get a reward for the mitzvah, which the body did 90% of it? And the body gets nothing? That can't be. The body must eventually come back. The soul must return to the body. And then the proper and true reward will be given. Which means that even those who have died are not going to remain that way forever. Only some souls who died, let's say, 4,000 years ago, they will come back to their bodies because their death is temporary. But it's a long temporary, 4,000 years. The people who died this year or recently, they're going to be coming back in a much shorter time. Because right after Mashiach comes, people start returning to life. And Mashiach is coming imminently. So the people who died recently, their death is not as tragic because they're not going to be gone for long. In fact, the people who died in the last 3 months, there was no funeral, right? Because of the corona, there was no funeral. There was no minyan. People didn't say Kaddish for those souls. And that's because they don't need it. They don't need it. Their path to heaven was straight, easy. They didn't need the Kaddish to help them along. That's really unusual. And they didn't need a big funeral. They didn't need a lot of people to testify that these were special, good souls. They didn't need it. That's, again, a huge compliment to them. So we really need to change our attitude about life and death, because we got it backwards. We're so intimidated by death when we really should be excited about life, because death is temporary. It has to be. I got to tell you that 5 months ago, I would never have said any of this. 5 months ago, no matter which group of people I would be talking to, could not handle this information. Death is temporary. People will come back. This is so weird. They would throw me out of the room. Now I'm safe. You can't throw me out, so I can say whatever I want. No, it's an amazing thing. Even secular people today, in the last 3 months, they understand it. They feel comfortable with the idea. And it's not because scientists are about to figure out how to stop people from dying, which they are. And it's not because scientists know how to turn a little piece of DNA into the person that it was. They know how to clone. So now these ideas are not so strange. But it's not because of that. Somehow, the truths that were hidden, that were elusive, that scared us or puzzled us, are not so elusive anymore. Now that we're getting closer to the time for it to happen, it's starting to feel comfortable. Like, yeah, really. Why should people die? What's with this dying? Who says it has to be? It doesn't have to be. That's pretty good news, no?